lone rancher for years. Until he found two Apache girls hanged by Stepfather, he had lived alone on the ranch for many years, and the land around him stretched endlessly, rolling under the sun and changing with the seasons.
The hills were dry and dusty in some places, but in others, patches of green appeared where streams or rainfall nourished the earth. Lone trees rose here and there, casting long shadows across the fields. The rancher's cabin sat in a small clearing, sturdy and weathered, with smoke curling gently from its chimney in the early morning. From this spot he could see the sunrise first, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and watch the sunset last, turning the hills into gold and purple. It was a beautiful, quiet life, far away from towns and neighbors. Every day began before the sun had fully risen. He pulled on his worn boots, adjusted the brim of his wide hat, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The ranch was quiet except for the soft sounds of nature. Birds chirped in the trees, a coyote howled far away, and the wind moved through the tall grass, creating gentle whispers across the fields. The rancher enjoyed these moments. The silence was not lonely, it was comforting. It allowed him to observe the land, the animals, and the changing weather with careful attention. He had learned long ago that life on the ranch required patience, observation, and a steady hand. His first task every morning was to check on the cattle. He walked the hills, noting which cows were grazing, which were resting, and whether any calves were missing. He knew each animal by sight and could tell if something was wrong just by watching its behavior.
A sick cow or a lost calf would be noticed immediately. Over the years, he had developed a rhythm, a quiet understanding of the land and the creatures that depended on it.
He moved with care, speaking softly to the animals, guiding them where needed and making sure they were safe. After tending to the cattle, he would check the water tanks, ensuring they were full and clean. Pipes, pumps, and troughs required constant attention. Sometimes the metal would rust or a pipe would leak, and he would repair it himself.
These tasks were not glamorous, but they were essential. He had become skilled at handling every kind of maintenance work on the ranch, from fixing fences to repairing barns.
Each day presented small challenges, and he met them with quiet determination and experience. The rancher also enjoyed riding through the hills on horseback. Even if the ride was just to inspect the land, he found it peaceful and rewarding. The horses were loyal and patient, knowing the routines of the ranch and trusting their rider. As they moved together across the hills and valleys, the rancher felt a sense of connection to the land.
He could predict storms, dry spells, and even minor shifts in the landscape. Living closely with nature had made him observant, patient, and aware of even the smallest details. Despite the quiet and isolation, he was never truly bored. There was always work to do. Fences needed repair, barns required maintenance, and the land demanded care. The vegetable garden provided another type of work, and he took pride in cultivating it, tending to the soil, planting seeds, and harvesting fresh produce.
Even reading provided quiet enjoyment. He had a small collection of books in his cabin, ranging from practical guides on ranching to stories of faraway lands.
At night, sitting by the fire, he would read and let the words transport him to places beyond the hills and valleys of his home. Living alone also meant facing challenges without help. If an animal became sick, he was the only one to care for it. If a storm arrived suddenly, he had to protect both the cabin and the livestock.
The wind could howl and the rain could fall in torrents, but he had learned to remain calm and handle any problem that arose. Nights were sometimes long and lonely, but he found comfort in the rhythm of life and the knowledge that he could rely on his skills to overcome difficulties. Over the years, he had met very few people. Occasionally, a traveler would pass by or a neighbor from a distant ranch would stop for a visit. Conversations were brief but polite. He had learned to communicate clearly, give honest advice, and keep trust. These few interactions reminded him of the world beyond his hills, but he preferred the quiet of the ranch. It was a life he had chosen, and he had made peace with its solitude.
Memories of his past sometimes came to him as he worked. He thought about family, friends, and towns he had once known.
But those memories were distant and gentle, like soft echoes from another life. He accepted that his life was now focused on the land, the animals, and the routines he had built. This acceptance gave him a sense of peace. The land had its rhythm, and he had learned to move in harmony with it, finding satisfaction in a life of purpose and routine. The animals on the ranch were constant companions. Horses, dogs, and cattle filled his days with presence and activity. Dogs followed him everywhere, alert and protective, while the horses carried him through the hills with grace and patience. The cattle, though less interactive, responded to his care and attention. The rancher treated every animal with respect, knowing that each had a role in the life of the ranch. He understood that living in harmony with them was essential for survival, and he found joy in the relationships he had formed with each creature. Even the small moments brought him happiness. Watching a bird build a nest, seeing a calf take its first steps, or noticing the first bloom of a wildflower on the hill, all these details made him feel alive. He had developed a sensitivity to life in its smallest forms, understanding that every action, every movement, and every sound held meaning. This awareness was part of what had kept him alive and safe in the remote and often harsh environment of the ranch. The rancher's hands were rough and strong from years of labor, but he took pride in their strength. Every scar, callus, and mark told a story of hard work and survival. Each day required physical effort, careful attention, and endurance. He had learned to handle whatever came his way, whether it was a stubborn fence, a broken water pump, or an injured animal. His strength was not only physical but also mental, honed by years of solitude and responsibility. He had accepted that this life would continue indefinitely. Solitude, work, and connection with the land had become the foundation of his existence. There were no distractions from the outside world, no demands from society, and no unnecessary complications. The rancher found satisfaction in this simplicity. The hills, the skies, and the animals were constants in a life that was otherwise unpredictable. Yet even in this quiet life he remained aware that the world could change quickly. Storms could arrive suddenly. Animals could fall ill, and the unexpected could always happen. His years on the ranch had taught him vigilance and patience, preparation and observation. He understood that small details often made the difference between disaster and safety. This awareness extended beyond the animals and land to the rare people who visited or passed nearby. He watched carefully, always noting the unusual, the unexpected, and the unfamiliar. The rancher's life was full of small rituals that gave him comfort and purpose. Morning routines, daily work, care for the animals, reading at night, and observing the sky. All these actions created a steady rhythm. Even in isolation, there was structure, beauty, and meaning. He had chosen this path long ago and had grown to love it. The solitude was not a burden, but a companion. And the land was not empty, but full of life, challenges. And yet he did not realize that his life, as quiet and controlled as it had been, would soon be interrupted by events beyond his imagination. The skills, patience, and observation he had developed over the years would soon be put to a new and difficult test. A day would come when the ranch, the land he had protected and understood so well, would witness a tragedy unlike anything he had faced before. His quiet, solitary existence would collide with human cruelty, and he would find himself at the center of a story he could never have predicted. Even as he tended the hills and cared for the animals, he remained unaware that the lessons he had learned in solitude, observation, patience, vigilance, and moral awareness, would be critical in the days to come. His connection to the land, his understanding of life in its many forms, and his careful attention to every detail would guide him through challenges that no ordinary rancher could have imagined. He had lived alone on the ranch for many years. The land stretched for miles, with dry hills, patches of green where water gathered, and a few lonely trees scattered across the wide open space. From the little cabin he called home, he could see the sun rise first, painting the sky with pinks and oranges, and the sunset last, turning the hills into soft shades of gold and purple. The rancher had learned to live with the quiet, the wind moving through the grass, the soft calls of birds, and the distant howl of a coyote became the companions of his days. He had chosen this life long ago, leaving towns and neighbors behind to focus on the land and the animals that depended on him. Every morning, he woke up before the sun fully rose. He would put on his worn boots, pull on his hat, and step outside to check on the cattle. They moved slowly in the early light, some grazing, some resting in the shade. He knew each of them by sight. A missing calf or a sick cow would be noticed immediately. His hands were rough from years of work, but he liked it that way. Each scratch and callus told a story of hard work and survival. Life on the ranch required patience, strength, and attention. There was no room for carelessness. After checking the animals, he would go to the water tanks, making sure they were full and clean. Pipes and pumps needed constant maintenance, and he was always repairing something. He knew every corner of the ranch, every hill and path, every hidden watering hole. Walking these paths, he felt connected to the land. He could predict the weather from the clouds, the smell of the earth, and even the way the animals behaved. This knowledge had saved him many times, from sudden storms, wildfires, and even snakes that found their way into the barn. Despite his solitude, he was never bored. There was always work to do. Fixing fences, repairing barns, checking on the irrigation system, and tending to the small vegetable garden kept his hands busy. On some days he would ride through the hills just to see the land, letting his horse move steadily while he breathed in the fresh air. In these moments he felt a quiet peace, a satisfaction that came from doing something meaningful with his own hands. Yet, living alone also meant he had to face challenges by himself. If the weather turned bad or an animal became sick, he was the one to make decisions and take action. There was no one to call for help nearby. On stormy nights, the wind would whip around his cabin, and he would check the animals repeatedly to make sure they were safe. Sometimes he would sit by the small fireplace listening to the rain patter on the roof, thinking about how life had brought him here, far from everything familiar. The rancher had come to accept that his life would always be like this, quiet, isolated, and full of work. He had few visitors over the years, only occasionally meeting a traveler or a neighbor from a distant ranch. Even then, interactions were brief. He preferred it that way, finding comfort in his own routine and in the company of his animals. He spoke little to others, but when he did, people could see his honesty and care. His word was reliable, and his presence calm. Sometimes memories from his past would drift into his mind. He thought about his family, the people he had known, and the towns he had left behind. But these memories were distant and gentle. He had made peace with his choices, believing that the land itself had a rhythm he could follow. Each sunrise, each season, and each change in the weather became markers of time in a life far removed from the noise and rush of the outside world. The rancher also had a small library of books he kept in the cabin. They were well-worn and filled with stories of faraway places, history, and practical guides for ranching. At night, he would sit by the fire and read, letting the words take him to other worlds. These moments brought quiet joy and a sense of connection to life beyond the hills. Even in solitude, he found ways to feel part of something bigger. Animals were his constant companions. The horses were loyal and patient, understanding his routines and trusting his guidance. Dogs ran alongside him as he moved around the ranch, alert and watchful. The birds and small wildlife seemed to accept his presence, going about their lives in the shadow of his care. He respected them all, believing that living closely with nature was a form of understanding life itself. As days turned into months and months into years, the rancher felt a deep bond with the land he called home. He knew every rock, every stream, and every hidden path. He had built fences that would last decades, barns that would shelter livestock for generations, and trails that only he could navigate perfectly. In all these things he found purpose. The isolation was not loneliness. It was a life of focus, discipline, and connection to the world around him. He had no enemies, and the nearest town was many hours away by horseback or car. He felt safe, surrounded by the vastness of his ranch, and by the knowledge that he could handle whatever life sent his way. His days passed in quiet rhythm, predictable but not dull. Every sunrise brought new tasks, new small victories, and moments to admire the beauty of the land. And yet, beneath the calm, there was always a sense that the world could surprise him. Living alone taught him to pay attention to everything. A broken branch, a strange animal track, or an unusual sound at night could all be important. He had learned to trust his instincts, to move cautiously, and to act with both patience and urgency when necessary. These skills were part of what had kept him alive and safe over the years.
The rancher had accepted that this would be his life, a life of quiet work, deep observation, and connection with nature.
He did not crave fame, wealth, or attention. He wanted only to live honestly and carefully, tending to his animals, preserving the land, and respecting the rhythm of each day. He was content in his solitude, proud of the life he had created, and ready to face the challenges that might come with any new day. Little did he know, a day would come when his quiet life would be interrupted by a tragedy he could not have imagined. His knowledge of the land, his patience, and his vigilance would suddenly be tested in ways he had never faced before. The rancher felt the weight of the discovery long after he had called for help. The distant sound of sirens slowly approaching reminded him that the quiet of his ranch had been broken forever. He stood near the edge of the trees where the girls had been found, staring at the soft wind moving through the grass, and tried to steady his mind. Even though the authorities were on their way, he knew that the events he had witnessed would leave a permanent mark on him. His calm, solitary life had been replaced by tension, fear, and the heavy burden of what had occurred.
When the officers arrived, they moved quickly, setting up barriers and taking photographs of the scene. The rancher watched from a distance, giving them room, yet he could not stop the emotions rising in him. He remembered the innocence of the girls, the way they had likely trusted the wrong person, and the pain they must have felt. It was a sorrow he had never experienced before in his life. He had dealt with storms, injuries, and animal accidents, but nothing could prepare him for this. The investigators immediately began asking questions. They wanted to know what the rancher had seen and when he had noticed the girls. He told them everything with careful detail, the time he had found them, the condition of the area, the path he had taken, and anything unusual he had observed in the days before. The officers listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. The rancher realized that his years of living alone and observing every detail around him now mattered in a way he had never imagined. Soon, neighbors from distant ranches began to arrive. News of the tragedy traveled fast through the nearby towns, carried by word of mouth, a few phone calls, and the natural curiosity of rural communities. Faces appeared at the edges of the property, filled with shock and sorrow. Some had tears in their eyes, while others clenched their fists in anger. The rancher noticed the range of reactions, how the same event could fill people with sadness, fear, and determination for justice. He stayed quiet, observing and reflecting, knowing that his role now was to assist and remain calm. The community began to organize. People offered blankets, food, and water for the officers who were working long hours in the heat. Others volunteered to help with transportation or communication, making sure that the investigation could proceed smoothly. Despite the shock and grief, there was a sense of solidarity among the residents. They understood that such violence, though rare in their quiet region, could not go unaddressed. Together, they wanted to ensure that the girls would be remembered and that justice would be served. As the investigation progressed, authorities began interviewing people in the nearby areas. They asked about the girls' family, their routines, and any history that could help identify potential suspects. The rancher shared observations about strangers he might have seen passing through, unusual behaviors among local residents, and anything else that could assist the investigators. His memory of every path, hill, and small detail of the land became invaluable. He realized that the skills that had helped him live alone and survive in isolation were now tools for helping solve a crime. Rumors and stories began circulating in the town. Some were based on fact, while others were based on fear and speculation. The rancher stayed away from these conversations, preferring facts over gossip. He understood that in a tragedy like this, misinformation could hinder justice. He kept careful notes, recalling each observation he had made since the day he found the girls. These notes, combined with his detailed recollections, became a resource for the investigators, helping them follow leads that might have otherwise been overlooked. Authorities focused their attention on the girls' family. They learned about the stepfather, a man who had a history of conflicts and trouble in the region. While many details were still unclear, the investigators noticed patterns of behavior that raised serious concerns. The rancher, observing from the outskirts, felt a mix of sadness and determination. The calm of his life had been replaced by the harsh reality of human cruelty, and he could not ignore it. He continued to assist quietly, knowing that every detail he provided could make a difference. Meanwhile, the town held meetings to address the situation.
Residents discussed how they could ensure safety for children and vulnerable members of their community. There was a shared sense of responsibility, and the rancher watched as people came together to support one another.
It reminded him that even in isolation, people were capable of unity and care. He felt a small measure of hope, seeing that tragedy could lead to action and awareness. Days passed as the investigation unfolded. Evidence was collected. Footprints and items from the area were examined, and interviews continued. The rancher accompanied some of the officers to show them paths and locations they might otherwise overlook. His knowledge of the land proved crucial in understanding how events could have occurred. Each day brought new challenges, but also progress. Slowly, the steps toward justice became clear. The emotional toll on the rancher was significant. He found himself thinking about the girls constantly, imagining their short lives and the fear they must have felt. At night, he would sit by his small cabin fire, staring into the flames, trying to make sense of the cruelty in the world. His work on the ranch provided some distraction, but the images and memories were persistent. He realized that he would carry this experience with him forever, a reminder of both the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance and care. Even as the investigation continued, there were moments of connection and humanity. The rancher noticed how officers treated each other with respect, how neighbors comforted one another, and how the community came together to honor the girl's memory. Small gestures, a shared meal, a quiet conversation, a candle lit in their memory reminded him that compassion could exist even in the shadow of tragedy. These moments gave him strength to continue assisting and observing, knowing that his efforts were meaningful. The rancher also became aware of the broader implications of the event. He began thinking about the challenges faced by families in remote areas, the difficulties of communication, and the vulnerabilities of children who depended on adults for safety. He understood that his quiet life had sheltered him from many dangers, but that others were not always as fortunate. This awareness deepened his sense of responsibility, both for his land and for the community around him. As investigators narrowed their focus on the stepfather, they relied on both physical evidence and witness accounts. The rancher's observations of unusual behavior, movements, and sounds contributed to building a clearer picture of what had happened. He remained patient, cooperative, and focused, understanding that justice required careful attention to detail. Every action he took, no matter how small, was part of a larger effort to ensure that the truth was revealed. The community continued to support the investigation, providing meals, transport, and moral support for the officers. Even children were aware of the seriousness of the situation, asking questions in their innocent way while learning lessons about responsibility and safety. The rancher noticed this and felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his experience, knowledge, and calm presence could help guide others, showing that even in the darkest moments, people could act with courage and integrity. Through long days of investigation, the rancher began to see patterns emerge. Clues that seemed small or insignificant at first now fit into a larger story. He marveled at how methodical and persistent the officers were, following every lead with care. The realization that his quiet observations had become crucial in solving a crime filled him with a sense of duty fulfilled. He understood that life on the ranch had prepared him in ways he had never imagined, training him to notice, to act, and to endure. By the end of this period, the community had grown stronger. Though sorrow still lingered, there was a shared determination to protect one another and to honor the memory of the girls. The rancher, standing on a hill and looking over his wide property, felt a mix of emotions: grief, pride, and hope. He knew that the journey toward justice was not over, but he also understood that the bonds formed in this time of crisis would last far longer than the days of sorrow. He returned to his routines, tending to the animals and walking the hills, but nothing was quite the same. The knowledge that life could change so abruptly stayed with him. He remained vigilant, attentive, and aware, understanding that the peace he had once taken for granted was fragile. At the same time, he recognized the power of community, compassion, and human determination. In this way, the tragedy became a lesson, a call to care, and a testament to the resilience of those who face hardship and choose to act with honesty and courage. The investigation moved steadily, though each step seemed slow and careful. The rancher watched as officers combed through every detail of the area where the girls had been found. Small clues, overlooked at first, were now being studied closely.
Footprints, the position of objects, and even the direction of the wind were considered important. The rancher realized that the work of justice required patience, much like tending to the land. One misstep could ruin a case, just as one neglected task could endanger the ranch. Days turned into weeks. The rancher spent long hours assisting the authorities, walking the hills, pointing out paths, and recalling any unusual activity he had seen. He remembered the way certain animals had behaved strangely, how he had seen distant tracks leading to the area, and even the odd sounds that had drifted through the night. To anyone else, these might have seemed small, unimportant, or even imaginary. But the investigators listened carefully, understanding that living alone had made him a witness in ways others could not be. The stepfather slowly emerged as a person of interest. The investigators learned more about him by visiting neighbors, reviewing records, and piecing together statements from people who had known the family. A pattern of troubling behavior became apparent. He had been controlling, quick-tempered, and had clashed with others in the community before. Some of the things people said were small and ordinary, but when put together, they painted a picture of a man capable of actions no one wanted to imagine. The rancher could not help but think about the girls. He often walked the paths where he had found them, imagining what their last hours might have been like. He thought about the fear they must have felt and the innocence they had carried with them. It was difficult, but he also knew that dwelling on grief alone would not help. He needed to focus on facts, on details, and on helping ensure that the truth came to light. The authorities began retracing the steps of the stepfather. They visited his home, examined his property, and interviewed those who had contact with him. Every small action, every word spoken by the girls or by others in the community became part of the larger puzzle. The rancher, walking alongside the investigators, noticed details that others might have missed: a small broken fence, a path hidden in tall grass, and even marks in the dirt that suggested someone had passed through at an unusual time. These small details began to fit into a bigger picture, slowly revealing what had happened. The process was exhausting and emotionally taxing. The rancher often felt the weight of what had occurred pressing down on him. Yet he remained steady, offering observations and insight, understanding that each day brought them closer to justice. He saw the dedication of the officers, their careful study of evidence, and their tireless commitment to truth. It gave him hope. Even in the face of tragedy, he witnessed the power of human determination and moral courage. As the investigation unfolded, more information about the girls' lives came to light. They had been bright, curious, and full of potential. People shared stories of their laughter, their small achievements, and their hopes for the future. These stories, while painful in the shadow of tragedy, reminded the rancher why his work mattered. Justice was not only about punishment, it was about honoring the lives that had been taken, preserving their memory, and preventing similar tragedies in the future. The stepfather's actions became clearer through witness accounts. People spoke of arguments, of times when the girls had tried to escape tension at home, and of behaviors that had gone unnoticed by outsiders. The rancher listened carefully, piecing together what these statements meant when combined with his observations. He realized that being aware, noticing small details, and understanding the land had all contributed to revealing the truth. His long years of solitude had trained him in observation and patience, qualities now critical in solving the case. Physical evidence also played a role. Investigators found signs that the stepfather had been in the area at unusual times, and some objects were traced back to him. The rancher assisted in confirming these observations, showing paths and spots that were difficult to see without experience. He felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his knowledge was helping uncover the truth. Each piece of evidence, each small discovery, brought a sense of progress. The slow work of investigation was beginning to reveal the full story. Throughout this time, the rancher reflected on human nature. He had lived a life of simplicity, in harmony with the land and animals, but the tragedy reminded him that people could carry darkness within them. He did not dwell on hatred or revenge, but he understood the importance of awareness and vigilance. The balance between kindness and caution, he realized, was critical in protecting the innocent and helping ensure justice. The authorities prepared for legal action against the stepfather. The evidence was strong, the witnesses reliable, and the observations detailed. The rancher provided statements about what he had seen, his careful observations of the land, and the timeline of events. His testimony became an important part of the case, demonstrating how someone living closely with the land could see things others might miss. Each word he spoke carried weight, and he felt the responsibility of ensuring accuracy.
Even with the progress, the rancher was haunted by memories of the girls.
He thought about their laughter, their small gestures, and the innocence that had been taken from them. At the same time, he found solace in the fact that his careful attention and the work of the authorities were bringing the truth to light. While the sadness never fully left him, he understood that action and awareness were forms of respect, honoring the lives lost by ensuring justice was achieved. The town, too, continued to process the events. People shared stories of the girls, offered comfort to each other, and supported the investigation. The rancher observed the way the community grew stronger in response to tragedy. While the initial shock and fear were intense, the collective determination to act, to protect, and to remember created a sense of unity. It reminded him that even in dark times, people could act with courage and integrity. Finally, the stepfather was brought into custody. Legal procedures moved forward carefully, ensuring that the truth would be fully examined. The rancher attended court sessions when needed, listening to statements, providing testimony, and witnessing the process of justice in action.
It was a slow, deliberate procedure, but he understood that it had to be done properly. Rushing could result in mistakes, and mistakes could mean the truth would remain hidden. Patience and care were as important in court as they were on the ranch.
Through it all, the rancher's perspective of life shifted. The land he had loved, the routines he had cherished, and the quiet solitude now felt different. He had faced a world beyond his hills, a world that carried both sorrow and the possibility of justice. The experience taught him that awareness, courage, and careful attention could make a difference.
Even in a world filled with pain, people could act with honesty, diligence, and care, creating hope and a sense of moral balance. When the court proceedings concluded, there was a sense of closure.
Justice had been served, though the wounds in the community and in the rancher's heart remained. He returned to his daily life, tending to the animals, walking the hills, and maintaining the land he loved. Yet he carried the memory of the girls with him, their lives a reminder of the fragility of innocence and the power of human observation and action. The rancher continued his life of solitude, but now with a deeper understanding of the world beyond his land. He had witnessed both the darkness that people could carry and the light that careful observation, patience, and courage could bring. His experience reinforced the importance of vigilance, compassion, and moral responsibility. Each day as he worked on the ranch, he reflected quietly on the lives lost, the justice achieved, and the lessons that the tragedy had taught him. Even as the seasons changed and the hills shifted from green to gold to brown, the memory of the girls remained. The rancher's daily routines continued, but they were now colored with awareness and respect for the fragility of life. The tragedy had forever altered his perspective, reminding him that even in isolation, one could make a difference. That attention to detail and moral courage mattered, and that justice, though sometimes slow, was always worth pursuing. Life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm on the ranch, but the memory of what had happened lingered in the rancher's mind. Each morning as he stepped outside to tend to the animals and check the fences, he felt the weight of the past events. The hills, the trees, and the fields remained unchanged, yet he knew that life itself had changed. The tragedy of the girls and the actions of the stepfather had left an imprint that would never fade. The rancher understood that while justice had been served, grief and memory would remain with him and the community forever. The stepfather had been convicted, and the court had delivered a clear decision. The community felt relief knowing that justice had been done. But relief was mixed with sorrow. The girls' lives had been taken far too soon, and their absence was felt deeply in the hearts of those who had known them. The rancher reflected on the fragility of life and how quickly circumstances could change. One moment, everything seemed normal, and the next, tragedy had struck. This awareness lingered in his thoughts, a constant reminder of how important vigilance and care were in the world. Despite the sorrow, the rancher found small ways to honor the memory of the girls. He would visit the area near the trees where they had been found, leaving small tokens, flowers, or simply standing in quiet reflection. He thought about the girls' laughter, their curiosity, and the innocence that had been lost. These moments were not easy, but they reminded him why the work of justice mattered and why remembering those who had passed was essential. In his own way, he participated in a silent ceremony of respect and remembrance. The community also continued to hold memorials and gatherings to honor the girls. Families, neighbors, and friends came together to share stories, express their grief, and offer support to one another. These gatherings created a sense of unity, even in the face of tragedy. The rancher observed the strength of human connection during these times, noticing how people came together to support one another, to heal, and to ensure that the girl's memory would endure. The community's compassion offered him a quiet comfort he had not expected. At the ranch, the daily routines provided a sense of grounding. Tending to the animals, maintaining the fences, and walking the hills gave the rancher moments of focus and peace. Yet there was also a heightened awareness in every step he took. The experience had changed the way he observed the land, the people, and even the small details of daily life. He noticed every sound, every movement, and every subtle change in the environment with more attention than ever before. The lessons of observation and patience, learned through years of solitude, had proven invaluable in confronting human tragedy. The rancher also reflected on the broader meaning of justice and morality. He had witnessed cruelty and wrongdoing, yet he had also seen courage, determination, and the power of collective effort. The authorities had worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, neighbors had supported one another, and small acts of vigilance had contributed to justice being achieved. In this, the rancher found hope. He realized that even in a world filled with challenges and darkness, human integrity and compassion could make a difference. Memories of the investigation remained vivid. He remembered walking the hills with officers, pointing out paths and tracks, and providing observations that had helped reveal the truth. Each moment reinforced the idea that careful attention, awareness, and moral responsibility were critical. The rancher understood that the work he had done, although ordinary in the context of his daily life, had profound consequences. His actions had contributed to uncovering a tragedy and ensuring that justice was served. Even in the quiet of the rancher thought about the lessons learned from the experience. He realized that life was unpredictable, and tragedy could strike anywhere, even in places that seemed safe and distant from the world. He understood the importance of community, vigilance, and moral courage. Small actions, careful observations, and a commitment to truth could make a difference, and he had witnessed this firsthand. These reflections shaped the way he approached life, adding depth and awareness to his routines and interactions. The rancher also noticed changes in himself. He had always valued solitude and the peace of his life on the land, but now he carried a heightened sense of responsibility. He became more aware of visitors, more attentive to unusual sounds or movements, and more thoughtful in his interactions with neighbors and travelers. The experience had sharpened his instincts and reinforced the idea that being observant and responsible was a form of protection for himself, for others, and for the vulnerable in his community. Despite the heaviness of memory, there were moments of quiet joy and hope. Watching the animals graze, hearing the wind move through the trees, or witnessing the sunrise over the hills reminded him that life continued. Nature, in its own steady rhythm, provided comfort and healing. The rancher took solace in the continuity of the land, understanding that while tragedy and human cruelty could affect lives, the world itself remained resilient. In these moments he felt a quiet peace, knowing that life carried on even in the shadow of sorrow. Over time, the rancher became a quiet source of guidance and wisdom in the community. People who faced challenges or uncertainties would come to him for advice, relying on his experience, observation skills, and calm demeanor. He shared insights about the land, practical knowledge about animals, and even lessons about careful observation and vigilance. Without seeking attention, he became an important figure, demonstrating that courage, integrity, and awareness could impact the lives of others in meaningful ways. The memory of the girls continued to influence his perspective on life. He often thought about the importance of protecting the vulnerable, standing up for justice, and observing the world with care.
These principles became a guiding force in his life, shaping not only his routines on the ranch, but also his interactions with the community. The tragedy had left a permanent mark, but it had also instilled a sense of purpose and moral clarity that he carried forward. Even as years passed, the rancher maintained his routines with diligence and care. Tending to the land, maintaining fences, and caring for the animals continued to occupy his days. Yet the experience of tragedy and justice remained a part of him. It was a quiet, persistent awareness that life was fragile, that human actions mattered, and that careful attention and moral courage could change the outcome of events. The lessons he had learned became inseparable from his daily life, shaping him into a man both deeply aware and quietly strong. The rancher sometimes reflected on the journey from discovery to resolution. He remembered the shock of finding the girls, the tension of the investigation, the slow uncovering of truth, and the eventual legal consequences for the stepfather. Each stage had been challenging, filled with emotions ranging from grief to hope. He realized that his own role, though ordinary in the context of his daily life, had been extraordinary in its impact. Through patience, observation, and moral responsibility, he had helped ensure that justice was achieved. In the evenings, as he sat by the small cabin fire, he would think about life, justice, and the lessons learned. He felt a deep respect for the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of community. Even in isolation, one could make a difference. Even in the face of tragedy, hope and justice could prevail. The rancher understood that life was fragile, but also that careful attention, moral courage, and compassion could create meaning in the face of sorrow. Though the memory of the girls remained, it was balanced by the knowledge that their story had not been forgotten. Justice had been served, the community had united, and the rancher had played a vital role in uncovering the truth. These realizations gave him strength and purpose. He continued his life on the ranch, tending to the land, caring for his animals, and observing the world with a careful eye, knowing that even small actions could have a profound impact. As the seasons changed and the land shifted from green to gold to brown and back again, the rancher remained a steady presence. He continued to live with patience, awareness, and respect for life. The tragedy had altered his world, but it had also strengthened his sense of duty, moral responsibility, and connection to both the land and the community. He knew that life was fragile, but he also knew that courage, observation, and integrity could make a lasting difference. The rancher's story became one of quiet strength. He had lived a solitary life for years, yet when faced with tragedy, he acted with courage, awareness, and determination. He had witnessed cruelty, but he had also witnessed justice. He had seen grief, but he had also seen the power of community, moral responsibility, and human resilience. In the end, he continued his life with a deep sense of purpose, carrying the memory of the girls and the lessons learned into every sunrise, every walk through the hills, and every task on the ranch. Though the past would always be a part of him, it did not define him. Instead, it shaped a man who had lived in solitude, faced tragedy, and emerged with greater awareness, compassion, and determination. His life continued on the ranch, simple in routine but profound in meaning. Each day became a quiet reflection of resilience, morality, and the enduring power of human courage.